for your presentation. So for this panel, so that will focus on space industry promotion in Japan and India, we'll try to do various things, such as looking at each country. What are the reasons for the growth of the space industry and the commercial space sector? What role did the government play in it? And we'll also try, of course, not to just look at Japan, look at India, look at Japan, look at India, but try to find some links, some commonalities between cases and some lessons that both sides can use. So for this panel, our two keynote speakers will be joined by two great experts and friends from Japan and India, starting with Professor Kazuto Suzuki, my colleague from the University of Tokyo. Kazuto Suzuki is a professor of science and technology policy at the Graduate School of Public Policy of the University of Tokyo, and a senior fellow of the Asia Pacific Initiative, the independence policy think tank. He graduated from the Department of International Relations at Ritsumeikan University and received a PhD from Sussex European Institute at the University of Sussex in England. Professor Suzuki, thank you very much for being with us today. And our second additional keynote speaker, panelist is, Dr. Narayan Prasad, who is the co-founder and director for research and operations at Spaceport Sarabhai, and the co-founder of SatSearch, a global marketplace for space supported and incubated by the European Space Agency. He was also an associate research fellow at the European Space Policy Institute, where he was leading a study on Europe-India cooperation in space. An awardee of the Emerging Space Leaders by the International Astronautical Federation, he has been supported by the German Academic Exchange Service to pursue doctoral research at the intersection of space industry and supply chain management. Narayan is supporting the development of a new space industry ecosystem in India by working with startups such as Bellatrix Aerospace, Satshore, alongside the government of Kerala's initiative to create a home for the new space in India. And before we actually start with the questions, the guiding questions that we prepared for this panel, and then the questions from the audience, I would just like Narayan to say a few words about Spaceport Sarabhai, the organization that is co-hosting and co-organizing this event. So Narayan, would you like to explain to us what Spaceport Sarabhai is?
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Quentin, and everybody who's helped create this event. It's a very timely event because we can learn from each other and see what we can do best, by cooperating further. As an overview, we know that one of the things that is a pretty good hallmark in many of the advanced space economies around the world, where there is a very strong industry presence, is a kind of somebody who can hold the mirror to policymakers. And that's an entity that we saw as largely missing as an independent think tank in India, because we do have some think tanks that do work in space, but we don't have somebody who is dedicated and focused only on space, like the European Space Policy Institute, or several of them that are around in other countries around the world. So the goal that we started this particular think tank now is to look at basically building primary evidence using scientific methods and evidence-based research to look at creating a foundation for policymakers to look at the data and then come to conclusions as to what they can be doing with respect to policy making. It's also to cherish the memories that ISRO has created over 50, 60 years by its missions and the people that have been behind those missions. Often you see some really interesting stories of scientists in ISRO who have spent 30, 40, 50 years in their careers building the organization. And unfortunately, we don't have a very strong history record as the Apollo program or others such, where everybody knows and wears the NASA t-shirts, but we want to also bring together stories that are often very forgotten or not very well publicized to the public sphere on the achievements that our scientists have been doing with respect to the efforts that has gone into creation of the space program in India. It's also to support young people who are very enthusiastic, from India, who are looking to enter into the space industry in one way or the other, want to pursue research, and it's to guide them and to provide them an overview of the avenues that are available for them to move forward. So it's a very holistic effort of trying to bridge things that will provide a holistic avenues to all kinds of people who are interested in developing this whole ecosystem at the end. And we also obviously want to help a lot of the young companies by opening up the knowledge to investors, to policymakers, and so on. So obviously you need a bunch of people to work together to make the ecosystem work. And we see ourselves as one of the organizers of that particular value chain across to function as a upcoming space power in the region.
Thank you very much, Narayan. And I think that's beautiful message that you're sharing, that you want to help building the future Indian space sector while making sure that all those that have laid the foundation for it to flourish are not forgotten. I think that's a really beautiful message and very important mission that you have. And we are really glad to be co-hosting this event with Spaceport Sarabhai. So thank you very much for introducing it. So now let's move to the panel. And so again, I encourage everyone to submit questions in the Q&A box. Dr. Kumar was really kind to already answer some of the questions by writing, but please do not hesitate to ask more. So now I would like to start with Professor Suzuki for, I would say, a general overview of the mutations that happen in the Japanese commercial space sector in recent years, in the last decade or a bit more, depending on your assessment. So could you help us understand this evolution, this rise of commercial actors, the change also of type of commercial actors, and give us some of the main reasons for this evolution? And as a subsidiary question, what role did governmental initiative play in this trend? And what do you think what role the government will play in the future?
Right. Thank you very much, Quentin, for your questions. I think the traditional Japanese space industry has been very fixated to the contract with JAXA. So basically, they are a part of the big company like Mitsubishi Electric or Mitsubishi Heavy or NEC, you name it. So those are basically the sort of taking the space program as the public works. So they think that space budget is basically coming from the national budget. But I think the change took place in about the last decade was well, first of all, it was the flourishing of the American space industry, particularly led by the Elon Musk, the success of the SpaceX. And also there are a number of other opportunities like, the COTS, the Commercial Orbital Transportation System, which are led by NASA. And the small ventures and the commercial companies are emerged as the purely commercial companies as a startup. And I think in United States there were rich funds available for the risk money for investing in those space startups. And the Japanese companies are inspired by, and Japanese entrepreneurs are inspired by those success of the American commercial startups. And some of them are quite skillfully managed to create some sort of a value in the Japanese space industry, which is more directing towards the global market rather than the domestic market, like the traditional industry. So I think these mindsets of the new entrepreneurs who are inspired from United States and elsewhere, the success of the commercial startups in the world, and then there are gradually, there are a number of the people who are taking the risks and trying to seek the niche, because the Japanese startups are not as big as the companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin, which are led by the Elon Musk and the Jeff Bezos, the #1 and #2 richest person in the world. So it's almost impossible to compete with them. So Japanese industry tend to seek the niche and create a new idea, such as Astroscale is a good example, which is the first commercial company to remove the, trying to remove the orbital debris for commercial services, and also companies like ALE, which is to create the artificial shooting star as an space entertainment. So these are the examples of the Japanese space startups which are trying to find a niche where not other companies like SpaceX are doing. And I think because of this emergence of the commercial startups, the government gradually, synchronizing the sort of a rhythm of the investment and the policy support for those people who have idea, but who doesn't have the access to the fundings, because in Japan, unlike United States, we don't have a huge venture capitals and angel investors. We don't. The Japanese industrial finance is more or less driven by the bank loans, and it's not the direct investment. So the Japanese government encourage the startups and those who are interested in space, bringing up the idea, and then the government will provide the financing. So programs like S-Booster, perhaps, some of the Takata-san has already mentioned about the J-Spark and the JAXA part, but also the Japanese government, the Cabinet Office, has prepared some of the programs, which is the IDEA competition, the S-Booster, or the S-matching, which is to connect the investors and the entrepreneurs, or S-net, which is to coordinate with the local authorities. And there are various measures that is available for these new startups and entrepreneurs. And then the government provide fundings, which is semi-governmental funds like INC-J. This is an innovation network coordination of Japan. This is the half public, half private funding. And also the Japanese government encouraged the companies like DPJ, the Development Bank of Japan, which is the sort of a policy-oriented financing agency. So there are government who are supporting the entrepreneurs who are coming into a space field, and then encouraging those people who are starting up. So I think there is a uniqueness in Japan for development of the space startups, which are pretty much hand in hand with the government policy. So unfortunately, we don't have the spaceport like Spaceport Sarabhai, and we don't have this sort of a private initiative that much, but we do have something called the Space Tide, which is the sort of a coalition of the space startups, and which creates the sort of an atmosphere that there is a community of the space startups. So this Space Tide is also another booster for the Japanese industry. So I'll stop here. There are a lot of things to talk about, but this is just the overall picture of the of Japanese commercial company in last decade.
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, that's interesting to understand that basically the movement started from the private sector and then the government jumped in to catalyze it and accelerate the movement, but not necessarily create it. Just a side note on Space Tide. So Space Tide is officially the Japanese kind of federation of space startups, but they organize, I think, twice a year events that are not limited to Japan. And they actually invite experts and players from the entire Asia Pacific region. And I think they have their conference coming up in around a month.
Yep.
So even if you're not a Japanese startup, please look at what they're doing. It's really interesting, and I encourage you to join. Now, Narayan, I would like to basically ask you a similar question about the background in India. So basically the recent change in the commercial space industry. And to that, I would also like to ask your assessment of how did the Indian commercial space sector react to the government taking up this issue and creating InSpace, for instance. So considering what the government is doing and also the natural trend, I would say, of the commercial space sector, where do you see the impact of these measures and overall of the Indian commercial space industry in, let's say, 10 years?
Right. Yeah. So I think what is interesting to look at is what has happened in the background over the last 50 years to look at what is coming next. So that, I think, gives a very good perspective. So when India started its space program, and like any other developing country, I think we started off from the scratch, ground up, doing everything through cooperation. But obviously, we don't have the legacy of aviation industry or the military industrial complex or stuff like that that allows companies to have grown and invest in areas like Boeing did or Lockheed Martin did or so on. So which meant that, when the space program in India started, I think the industry was mostly not in a position of taking such high risk to create such space related equipment, which meant that all of the burden of that was left on ISRO to do it, because ISRO had to take all of that risk to create something that would work in space. And then only then there could be some kind of a de-risking environment for the industry to participate. And they did well, because in the 1970s is when ISRO opened up its industry policy to involve greater industry participation. And that happened through mostly involving a series of buyback arrangements, providing a surety to certain companies who are involved that the technology will be transferred, the know-how will be transferred, and they will be like their hand will be held, and then basically they will also be procured. And that's been a large case with a number of companies that have grown in India who have been supporting ISRO in various of its missions. But I think the big change that we see today is companies who are trying to take a risk by themselves and are trying to operate outside of this ISRO procurement realm. So the change there is, of course, that nobody thought, for the last 50 years that there will be 2 or 3 startups that want to create their own launch vehicles and launch out of India. Nobody really thought that we will have series manufacturing plants for satellites of 100 or 150 kilograms, where you could produce 200 of them, independently as a private company in India, right? So these are all thoughts and risks that people have started taking over the last 10 years. And it's also the atmosphere, because in the last 15 years, India has been a hub for several unicorns, technology unicorns that have emerged. And today you have several technology billionaires in India who are running very successful venture capital funds. And there is also several international venture capital funds like Sequoia or Antler or others who are operating out of India with their own independent funds. So which meant that only in the last, I would argue, 5 years or so, the venture capital community and the angel investment community has become very strong, and that is based off of the success of the larger technology industry that has made the capital available for a lot of these companies. So really, I think at this moment, from some of the latest figures that I've seen indicate that there are about 175 space startups in India that have been formed to the current day. And I would argue that unlike US or even Europe, for example, about 80% of them are in the downstream segment, which means that they are using some sort of an IT infrastructure and using satellite data or position or other things, communication, to really solve problems immediately in the society, in agriculture or infrastructure or other industries as such. And I would argue only about 15 or 20, less than 15%, I would argue, is really in the upstream segment, which is high risk and high capital that is around. It also augurs very well with the problems that are in India, right? So there are several companies that are modernizing and digitizing and increasing productivity in value chains such as agriculture, giving access to farm credit using satellite data, or insurance, or basically market intelligence. It could be weather, it could be pollution, it could be aquaculture. So you see a lot of industries that are really embracing satellite-based information. And often they might not consider themselves as a space startup, but it's a real question of what do you classify as a space startup, because they really could be a agri-tech company that is using satellite data. And if you will take the larger definition of space, they're using space as a means of a sensor, and they're doing this, right? So I think from that perspective, you have a lot of things that are aligned pretty well. But the real question now is, obviously, this is a great moment that we have with the formation of InSpace. I think what is really the leapfrogging moment in India, we talk a lot about the leapfrogging moments. And, this is a leapfrogging moment for the space sector, because we have seen the several problems that, advanced space countries have gone through, because institutional divide in decision making for entrepreneurs exist. So for example, if you take the example of US, you have FAA, and then you have FCC, and then you have NOAA, and you have the Commerce Department, and you have so many other institutions that are actually involved in policy making with respect to getting authorization and clearance to a larger extent, right? And I think we in India are learning from those experiences. And basically, I think the creation of InSpace as an institution is a leapfrogging moment, because it is bringing together all the relevant agencies in the government to give an entrepreneur a single window to be able to go to that one agency and get everything that they want. And it's not just only the authorization, but it's also the promotion at the end, right? So it's very holistic. And I think I have not really seen anybody around the world as policymakers make such an experiment that India is making within space. So and that is the reason I think it is truly leapfrogging as a moment. And I think, as this progresses, this will create more and more enthusiasm among the investors. I would see more and more young people creating more and more such companies. And the goal is very simple. I think what we want to see is like the internet companies that have emerged out of India that are serving people around the world with their products and services. We want to see our own companies come up and grow, and not just serve problems that are in India, but also create products and services that will reach out to the global world and integrate India as a space economy that is not just serving locally, but also is taking a fair share of the pie when it comes to the international market, and start competing in other markets. And also, given the culture and the price point at which Indians can solve certain problems, it could be one of the ways in which several problems in places like Africa and South America and Asia, Southeast Asia, which are very close to cultural closeness to India, and the price point at which that they can solve these problems, those are really critical areas. I think I see growth coming up in the next 10 years or so.
Thank you very much for your explanation. And I would like to thank the audience, because we have a lot of very good questions appearing in the Q&A box. So some are answered directly by the speakers, but I will definitely pick some of them to be answered orally a bit later. And so based on what Dr. Prasad has said, so this very positive aspect of in-space being the kind of one-stop place where to discuss with the Indian government on various space-related aspects. I think that is particularly interesting also as a comparison to Japan, with Professor Suzuki explaining that various ministries, various agencies have their own programs, and there is not this like one-stop place where you can get everything. So I think that's a very interesting case study for Japan to look at how in-space operates. So I would like to turn to Dr. Kumar for another question on in-space. So you explained what kind of support in-space is doing. You mentioned a few actual applications that you got. An aspect that I am wondering about, so your directorate is in charge of interfacing with the industry. And I was wondering, what feedback did you receive from the industry about the early operations of in-space? And how do you integrate this feedback in your future operations, in your overall organizational policy?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In fact, we had immediately after inauguration of our head office, next day we had an industry meet where around 150 plus industrialists turned in, and we had an open, frank feedback session also from them. First, we presented our vision and all this thing, what we plan to do. The major concern, which was, as some of the participants here also are expressing, is that we don't have still our space activities bill, which is in final state, of course, and which is coming in the coming session of Parliament, or maybe depends upon what kind of legal things is there. So as you see, we are very serious, and Government of India is working on it. Till such time, we will use the DOS framework, which we have been executing. So it will not stop our work. We will learn also during this time, and we will give. As far as this feedback, when we take it, we put it up to our higher ups to take up. This is the concern. So there were the main concern were that application process. They don't want to run one department to other department. So there may be some 2-3 department necessary, like Department of Telecommunication, DPIIT. So for this, we have started the process of single window agency, where you apply to InSpace, and InSpace in turn will connect with other agencies wherever they want. Till such time a law in place, we will help and assist them to sail through faster. That's why Prime Minister says that InSpace is for pace. InSpace is for pace. Thus I repeat it here. So this is the kind of thing, and we take immediate action, and our management is quite serious. Another thing what we are planning is digital platform. This platform will be unique in itself, and we will see that every concern, we will have a feedback panel there. We will have a question, answer, decision, and all these things they will be able to connect us there. Almost anytime they can drop to us, they can connect to us, and we will try to answer in the best possible way. So these are the things we are starting in a humble note, but yeah, it's a good start. That's what I'd say.
Thank you very much. And I think there's definitely a best practice to, as soon as you start, keep the connecting with all the industrial players. And so I'm wondering basically the same question about JAXA. So the business development department. To what extent you have the flexibility to adjust your programs and your various activities depending on the, I would say, continuous feedback from the companies with which you co-create solutions?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So, yeah, so we also gained a lot of insights through the co-creation activities such as the interactive dialogue and the concept studies and the business demonstration together with the private partners. In particularly, we learned that it is important to engage in our R&D, research and development with a sense of speed and exit-oriented mindset. So, and to implement our results in the field of the commercialization, which will truly support the creation of the private business. So yeah, we think it's important to have the two-way communication, and so we have to react in a very flexible way, and it depends on the business situations by the private company. And new expansions are also emerging. I think in the past, JAXA R&D was required to conduct it for the JAXA project, as Suzuki Sensei explained that. So, but now JAXA's R&D results are being used in a variety of ways, not only for JAXA's project, but also for the private projects outside of JAXA. And the JAXA researchers feel very, very difficulty, but also the joy of seeing the JAXA's their results, R&D results, implemented in the various ways in the real society outside of JAXA. So we have to create many such sites for the creation. And so although the results, co-creation results are still in the preliminary phase, and so the results are still on an early and small scale, but they are gradually emerging. And we feel that this co-creation framework between the JAXA and the private companies is providing to be, I think, effective. So that the community expects us to expand this co-creation framework into a larger project or more different areas, and to make it a policy that leads to a human resource development while involving industry, academia, and the public R&D agency like JAXA. So we would like to increase, so I think it's important that we should increase the understanding both within JAXA and also the outside of JAXA, and develop the measures to facilitate the collaboration, and also it's important to eliminate the barriers between the two parties, so JAXA and the private company. So it has just started, but I think it will be, it is very effective.
And actually related to the fact that JAXA accelerated this industry promotion initiative fairly recently, there is a question that I would like to ask now because it's directly related from Ina Porlaje, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, from the Philippine Space Agency, who asked basically, what was JAXA doing before 2017, so before this acceleration, in terms of encouraging collaboration with the private sector and also more investment in the space sector?
Yes, it's a good question and a difficult question. So, so when starting in 2003, so I think we thought it is important to lower the threshold to the space. So I think in this in the beginning of the 2000, so we tried to gather a lot of business idea or information from the lot of private company, but but this is I think business ideas are kind of driven by the technical sheet or something, and sometimes it may be it might be a business, but it was not a big business. But currently, especially in the GSPAC program, so this we think that it is important that business idea itself is very important, not the technical sheet or something. So and also we think it's important that how big the market will be, or how sustainable this and how global the business will be. So we think it's more important as of now. And so the JAXA's so in the 2000 in the beginning of the 2000, so we think that any business idea was highly welcome, but currently we try to focus on the more global, more bigger and more sustainable business idea, and also we think it is more important that how the JAXA's R&D results or our researcher can contribute to the business ideas achievement. So so matching itself is also important, and also this we also think that it's important that this opportunity may become our JAXA's R&D opportunity or not. So I think that JAXA's mind throughout the business promotion itself is completely changed or improved, I think. I don't think if it is a question or not, but it is.
No, I think you perfectly answered the question, and it's directly related with what Professor Suzuki was explaining, the fact that this new type of space industry, commercial ventures in Japan are having a totally different perspective on who is the customer and targeting really global markets, highly competitive markets, rather than just relying on government demand. So thank you very much. So now I would like to turn again to Professor Suzuki and Dr. Prasad. I will ask you basically the same question. So we talked a lot about what the government is doing, but could you think about a few noteworthy non-governmental initiatives that have had a great impact on the development of the commercial space sector, respectively, in Japan and India? So Professor Suzuki already mentioned SpaceTide, but what can you think as a really non-governmental programs that gave a big push to the Japanese commercial space sector?
Well, it's there's no clear-cut answer to that question. SpaceTide was obviously one, but there are a number of cases where there are some TV programs which are explaining that the space is changing, and there are a number of the occasions that the entrepreneurs appeared in the TV programs. And another thing is that the real estate agents are giving lending the offices in the area which is closer to Hitotsubashi. I think the JSPARC is also located there. And there is a sort of a concentration of the space startups in a sort of a very narrow district around the Hitotsubashi, the Nipponbashi, and the Ginza area. So this is another visibility to bring up the presence of the Japanese space industry, and that creates the atmosphere that there is something going on. And there are a number of the occasions to meet with the entrepreneurs and discuss with them. There are, for the students, there are lots of opportunities to do the internship. Those are the kind of things that is creating. It's not exactly an initiative, but I think it has the certain value in it to encourage people to think that this is an opportunity. And while I'm speaking, I'll just I wanted to answer is the to answer one of the questions which are addressed to me about the government policy towards the global customers. I don't think the Japanese government has any program to address or to match the global customer and the Japanese startups. So what Japanese government does is to build up the capabilities at home and to give the sort of a home ground advantage for the Japanese startup. But it is the startup's own initiative to find the customer outside Japan. For example, the lunar exploration startup called iSpace has the office in the United States and Luxembourg. The Astroscale has the office in United States, UK, and Israel. So these are the company's business. So not everything is done by the government. The industry, the startups have to take their own risks, and that's so I think that's not what the Japanese government do. But instead, the Japanese government is now exploring the possibility for the, let's say, the government use of the foreign countries like Egypt or UAE. There are, government-to-government contacts, and explore the possibility that there will be a demand for the space demand or satellite demand, and then the Japanese government bring back those a possibility or the government-oriented market, the public market, and to encourage the Japanese businesses to enter into those market. And in fact, there are some of the cases. One of the successful case is to launching the UAE satellite or probe to Mars was launched by the H2A, the Japanese launcher. And another one is that the Japanese university have linked with the Egyptian government to provide the small-sat program. So these are some of the cases that can be considered to be a sort of, it's not exactly a matching, but it is providing an opportunity for the Japanese companies and universities.
Thank you very much for your answer. And indeed, the Nihonbashi kind of cluster of space startup is a very vibrant ecosystem. And JAXA has, we have to put that to the credit of JAXA also for having created the so-called, I think it's pronounced cross Nihonbashi, right? Written X Nihonbashi, but pronounced cross Nihonbashi. That is also a place where startup can work together, meet, and have kind of co-working space. That's really a nice place to go, I say, for those of you who are in Japan. And so Narayan, basically same question, a short answer on non-governmental initiative, and then I think we'll take a couple of questions from the audience, because there are too many, I think, that are popping in the Q&A box. So we'll have to choose maybe 2 or 3 before ending.
Sure. So I think for India, I would put 3 things into perspective as a non-governmental effort that is of significance. One is recently we have a very large business house called the Tata Group. Many people might know them around the world. So Tata Group has recently started an initiative where they are, it's called Mark 33 Aero. It is based in Bangalore, and they are basically encouraging companies to build companies in defense, aerospace, and space related sectors. So this is a specialized initiative that is looking at high technology companies, supporting high technology companies in defense, aerospace, and space. And they've already supported one space company through that initiative. And this is a very interesting initiative because they are a non-profit, but as a business house, and that's been around for more than 100 years. They come with a lot of credibility and so on. So they've done two very interesting things. One is they have tied up with national laboratories that we have, CSIR and NAL, in India, and basically they are opening up the facilities that these laboratories have been having for the last 50 years that have been developed. There are 30 or 40 labs, I think, or even more of them, and they have tremendous amount of facilities that are available in them. And so now they have worked with them to create a partnership program where some of the companies who want to access those facilities and want to utilize the consulting from those experts in those laboratories and so on, are able to use that platform to get access. Obviously, this reduces the burden of cost as well as access to such facilities for young companies to use these facilities. The second is really an investor network that they have created for such companies, or they are creating in the process. So they also, are seed investors in several of these companies by themselves, which means that they're really putting money is where their mouth is, to then have other investors to come in at the same time as well. So I think this is a very interesting initiative because they have a support group of companies or people who are experienced entrepreneurs, and they also have mentor network. They're matching it with the facilities that are available. They're also matching it with the investors. So this allows new companies who have really good ideas to go to them and get some support to both technically as well as financially at the same time. The second is really emergence of three separate industry associations in India. One is called the Indian Space Association, which was inaugurated by our own Prime Minister. The second is called Satcom Industry Association in India. And the third is an association of young space companies called Space Federation of India. So these three industry associations have emerged to a large extent with a lot of membership from young and old companies at the same time, to really provide a representation of the overall industry. So like you have, I would say, Space Tide in India, we have, let's say, three different Space Tides in India, depending on these things. And they have, membership from different companies in these three different, associations at the end. And, Satcom Industry Association is will hold also an annual space conference. And the first edition of that will happen in third week of October in Delhi, this year. So that is the second one. I would say, like, the third one is really our own initiative at Spaceport Sarabhai. One of the things that we've seen that is missing in many of the developing space economies is a group where people have management focused expertise, but also have technical expertise and legal expertise at the same time when it comes to space. So the problem is that there are not really so many space economists in the world who really have an understanding of what goes on in technology and policy at the same time, and can put that into perspective as to what you can do with respect to incentivizing industries to scale. So what we are doing really is trying to create such a research group that has people who come with domain expertise in technology, domain expertise in business, and domain expertise in policy and law, and have all of these three things work together in one group to really come up with ideas that are in coherence with all of these three different expertise, to then reflect on policymakers as to what they can do, taking into perspective all of these three things, and making sure that this gives a very strong foundation. So as an example, for this, we have done a couple of studies now, which we will soon be releasing. One is, for example, a study on procurement systems around the world, We've compared procurement systems in the US, in Europe, in UK, in Australia, in other places like that, and said, okay, this kind of incentivization through procurement schemes have led to these kinds of results. And this is the impact that the industry is having in all of these things. So then, you really have to take into focus what technology was being really procured, what is the legal aspect of that, and how does that actually translate into business. And the idea is that, can we actually identify pros and cons of each of these systems to build something that is advantageous to the environment in India, for example. Right. So we will run many such research studies on different topics. And the idea is that we publish them as open studies where we are open to criticism. We will open up all the foundation data for anybody to criticize us and to improve the overall study focus. But the idea is that once we publish this openly as an open study, we want policymakers to reflect on it and hopefully consider to take some of the decisions based on such evidence at the end. So yeah, I would say these are all complementary to what the government is already doing, and we will basically be supporting the ecosystem by all such initiatives.
Thank you very much, Narayan. And I think we have time for one more question, and I will scrap my closing remarks. Anyway, I don't need to add much more than to what was said. I would like to ask our first speaker to be also our final speaker, Dr. Kumar, if you would like to take the final question of this webinar. So it is the question from Prachit Campbell. So about the support that InSpace gives to companies, how does the support vary depending on whether the customer is the government or the private sector? And the second question that was asked by Prachit is, does the support by InSpace extend to assisting companies find their use cases, in particular for government applications?
Yeah. So very nice question. Actually, the mandate of InSpace is very clear. In one word, I will say any space activity by non-government private entities is within the ambit of InSpace. Now, there is no doubt in this. ISRO can do business. We have no role to play. If any private company wants to do space business, they have to come through InSpace. So that is the one thing. The second, the answer is, does InSpace assist companies use their use cases? Yes, we will make a system to connect them, right? This is the application you can use. We will provide the help through our online platform. So these are the certain kind of thing, but when they private company to private company, we have no role to play. They can work. If they want to launch a satellite, launch a launcher, for that certainly, and establish a ground station, they have to come to us for the permission. I hope this answers.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. And thank you for being concise. Actually, we have a minute or two for a final question, so I will turn to Professor Suzuki. So there is a question on whether JAXA, ISRO, InSpace would be able to cooperate with like-minded space agencies, that's the terminology the person used, in Australia or the United States, to link and share best practices. So this is the kind of first part of the question. And then the second part, I think, complexify a bit the thing by mentioning the Quad and supply chain. So if you have any comment about that, I would love to hear it.
Right. So let me just be a scholar of international relations. The Quad is the cooperation between Japan, United States, India, and Australia. So this is the like-minded countries to coordinate. And there is a sort of a like-minded, the friends working together to, let's say, to counterbalance the emergence of the China as the global power. So I think the work on the space is also one of the area where the Quad countries work together. And one of the decision which was made last week when Quad leaders met in Tokyo to discuss about the future cooperation scheme, and one of which was to share the satellite information of monitoring the maritime illegal fishings and sort of disturbing activities. So this is some sort of a possibility that Japan, United States, India, and Australia can coordinate and to work and use the space system, because each countries, including Australia, are very much keen in working on space, and they do have the capabilities. So I think sharing the hardware technology is not really the major issue, but I think it is to the much more effective use of space for the Quad is to share information and share the capabilities. So for example, if there is some incident that will take out the space capability of one country, then other countries' satellite will support and substitute the services, for example. So those are the kinds of coordination which took place among the Quad countries, but I think it's not really the aim of the Quad to build up the supply chain, although because the many stuff in the space is subject to the export control because of its very sensitive nature. So again, it is a little bit complicated if you try to make it as a sort of an industrial coordination, but I think it is reasonable to have the bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral coordination of the use of space.
Thank you very much, Professor Suzuki, for this very important clarification on what the Quad does and what the Quad doesn't do, because sometimes indeed it could be confusing for people who are not following it closely. And so you had the final say in this webinar, because now we will be closing it. So first of all, I would like to thank warmly all our speakers today for the very lively session. I would like also to thank the attendees for all these very good questions, and I do apologize to those who submitted questions that we didn't have time to answer. So sorry about that. All the questions were really good, so it was tough to choose. I would just like to conclude by mentioning a bit what will happen in terms of STIG Space Policy webinar in the coming months. So we will have a break for the summer, so there will be no STIG Space Policy webinar in July and August, but we'll be coming back in September with our sixth STIG Space Policy webinar. So stay tuned for the information about this upcoming webinar. I hope most of you, when registering, accepted to be on our distribution list so that you will be warned of future events. Yes, I see. Dr. Kumar, would you like to conclude the session, the final word?
No, no, thank you very much. I have to leave for another meeting. That's why I'm sorry. I will leave with your permission, Professor.
Of course, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It was really nice to have you for this final webinar of the semester. So anyway, we'll close the session. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and let's stay in touch for future events. And do follow, apart from the webinar, we have a lot of events we're organizing at the Graduate School of Public Policy and the STIG program. So check our website from time to time, and see you all very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.